nonprofit organization, and we design and deliver strategic solutions for green chemicals, sustainable materials, and environmentally preferable products. And the 3 logos here represent the 3 programs that we use to achieve our mission. The Chemical Footprint Project is an organizational level survey to assist companies in setting goals and measuring progress towards overall proactive chemicals management. The Business NGO Working Group, which is the unique collaboration of business and environmental leaders working to advance healthy materials and safer chemicals, and the GreenScreen for Safer Chemicals, which I'll be talking about now. So GreenScreen, the GreenScreen program, I like to think of it as having sort of this suite of hazard assessment tools, and at the foundation is the GreenScreen for Safer Chemicals, which is the first piece of the program. The GreenScreen was published back in 2007, and the GreenScreen for Safer Chemicals is a hazard assessment methodology that was really designed to identify both chemicals of concern as well as safer alternatives. And some aspects that we hear from users that make it unique and valuable to them include the fact that the methodology itself is transparent. You can download it on our website. It's hazard-based. It's scientifically robust, systematic, very comprehensive. It's developed by Clean Production Action in partnership with scientific leaders from around the world, from all types of organizations, from business to nonprofit to government to academia. In terms of how a chemical is assessed with GreenScreen, there's kind of these 4 key steps. You have to identify the chemical that you're going to assess, which kind of speaks back to what you were talking about, Topher, with looking for unique identifiers and CAS number or EC number. The next step is to collect the data and information on that chemical that is then used to classify hazards. And then those hazards, the classifications of those hazards are rolled up into a score. And typically this type of assessment, because it's very comprehensive, is performed by a toxicology firm that is licensed by Clean Production Action to provide these services. A little bit more about collecting data. So the data that the assessor would collect is on a suite of 18 human and environmental health and physical hazards. And we like to think of this as sort of a standard suite. So this was not built in isolation, but again, looking at precedent from around the world, particularly authoritative precedent from regulations such as the US EPA's new chemicals and EU REACH regulations, classification and labeling systems such as the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS, and voluntary initiatives such as the US EPA's Safer Choice program. And there are some unique aspects or notable additions. We did create a little bit extra discernment by calling out endocrine activity as a unique endpoint. We also pulled neurotoxicity out of systemic toxicity because these are some significant concerns and we want to identify where there are and are not data. And then we added the physical hazards really to address some worker health and safety issues. So for each of these GreenScreen hazard endpoints, then we developed a set of hazard criteria. And what these hazard criteria do is allow you to assign a score, a high, moderate, or low for each of those 18 hazard endpoints. And this is just an excerpt, but the assessor takes all the data and information that they find, and that includes presence or absence on some authoritative lists, as well as data. So it could be measured data, animal studies, or human epidemiology studies. It could be estimated data from computer modeling or looking at surrogates or analogs, etc. So all the available data information is combined and compared to the criteria. And what comes out after that step is what we call a GreenScreen hazard summary table. And what's really amazing about this is that at a single glance, you can really get a sense of the overall hazard profile of a chemical. And you'll see this come up later in Michelle's talk. So you've got the different hazard endpoints, and then the hazard level. L is low, M is moderate, H is high. You've got a VH and a VL for very high and very low. They're color coded so that you can get that basic impression at a glance. And so there's a lot of information like in here that's then backed up by hundreds and hundreds of pages of summarized data and rationale and conclusions. Then that hazard summary table is taken and compared with the GreenScreen benchmark criteria, which are a series of hazard endpoints and hazard levels that get combined to create the criteria. And this allows you to roll up that score for that chemical across all those 18 endpoints into a single score that allows you to place those chemicals on a continuum and can really inform decision making. So this is the decision logic. That weaves all of that complexity, and there's a lot of transparency around how those conclusions are made, but then you get the simple score that can easily be communicated. In terms of how the benchmarks criteria were set, and a little bit more about the benchmark one, again, we looked at global precedents for what regulatory agencies around the world were using to ban or restrict chemicals. And so this definition is fairly harmonized definition of chemicals of high concern, which include CMRs, carcinogen, mutagen, reproductive and developmental toxicants, PBTs, persistent and bioaccumulative and toxic, and other types of equivalent concerns such as endocrine disruptors. In terms of how you get a GreenScreen assessment, we've got these toxicology firms called licensed GreenScreen profilers. You can contact them directly to find out what assessments they've done or to get a new assessment done or purchase an existing assessment. There are also databases that host any freely available assessments. Clean Production Action has the GreenScreen store. We're going to be hearing from Healthy Building Network next, and you'll see the Chemical Hazard Data Commons is listed here. And there are a few others. Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse has their Chemical Hazard database, and ToxNot PBC as well. So now I want to just slide into the next evolution. So as part of GreenScreen, when we were developing the criteria, we saw that, leveraging the presence of chemicals on authoritative lists and all the rigorous study that goes into doing that really can make a GreenScreen assessment more efficient. So we built in all these different list-based information sources into the GreenScreen criteria. And what we started to hear from users is, wow, well, that would be a really useful standalone first step as a screening step. And so what we did was we ended up pulling out GreenScreen List Translator as a standalone tool, as well as incorporating it as a step of the more comprehensive assessment. So we did that back in 2012. And so what List Translator does, it's really a screening tool that's designed to quickly identify chemicals of high concern. It's built on the same criteria as GreenScreen, so you've got all the same hazard criteria, all the same hazard endpoints, and you use the benchmark one criteria, which we call the List Translator scoring algorithm. But so you just use that chemical of high concern criteria. And because the main difference between GreenScreen and List Translator, in addition to only looking at benchmark one, is that rather than looking at all available data, you're only looking at list-based information sources, or which is presence or absence of a chemical on a list and how that authoritative body evaluated it. And the great thing about that is because it's looking for presence or absence, this can be and has been automated, so it makes it a really scalable approach. And there's a lot of confusion about lists out there. There's different types of lists. There's hazard lists put out by authoritative bodies. There are restricted substance lists put out by sectors and companies. And what's unique about List Translator is that it has this, it's built on that GreenScreen for Safer Chemicals foundation, the hazard endpoints, the hazard criteria. It's a very systematic look at, and it has that consistent criteria for evaluating chemicals and placing them on a list. So the LT1 chemicals actually captures a really wide array that typically encompasses a lot of these other lists. In terms of how GreenScreen list translator screening is done, it's the exact same steps that we talked about for GreenScreen for safer chemicals. You identify the chemical, collect data, classify hazards, and assign the score. When you collect data, you just use list-based data, and when you assign the score, you just use benchmark 1. But everything else in the classify hazards is exactly the same. And in this case, our software partners have automated this whole process, so it can happen in seconds, which is amazing. And so this is just a visual representation of what GreenScreen List Translator does. It takes this information from the list, passes it through these hazard endpoints and hazard criteria, and then through the benchmark 1 criteria to assign a score. But really, it only answers the question, is this chemical a chemical of high concern? And it can be yes, possibly, or you don't know. This tool cannot identify safer alternatives. It can only identify known chemicals of concern. If you want to identify safer alternatives, this is a great first step for screening, and then you need to go to something more comprehensive. So where do you find all the information? In that document that I mentioned that's on our website, the GreenScreen Guidance and Resources, there are 5 sections and 13 annexes, I think. This is section 5, annex 11, called the GreenScreen Specified List, and it gives you the abbreviation of the list, which you'll see in all of the automated tools. It gives you a little bit more description, what hazard endpoints, and it gives you the links to those lists, so you can go look at them. The other thing that the methodology does is it bins lists into 2 categories. There are authoritative lists and there are screening lists. And this was done again with our technical advisory committee and peer review. An authoritative list is a list that's based on comprehensive expert review by a recognized authoritative body, whereas a screening list doesn't meet one or both of those criterion. Lists are developed for a lot of different reasons by a lot of different organizations, so it's important to understand what it is in order to know how to use that information, and that's all been built into the list translator. And ultimately, what we have, this is Annex 12 of the GreenScreen for Safer Chemicals Guidance document, is a GreenScreen list translator map. And what this does is it gives you all of those 43 lists, and each of those lists has certain categories. This is, for example, category 3B. So each of those categories is then translated into a GreenScreen hazard endpoint as well, and then that gets translated in compared to the GreenScreen hazard criteria to give you a hazard level or range, and then that gets rolled in compared to the benchmark 1 criteria to give you a list translator score. And there's 2 organizations that have automated the GreenScreen list translator that are licensed to do so, Tox Not PBC and the Healthy Building Network.